This video exposes a German masquerader who's a vile and sadistic murderer, my landlord, who will likely keep murdering more people. It also exposes the German masquerader tactics to deceive their likely victims while continuing to create opportunities to make attempts on their lives. Hello, friends. This is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. I have often wondered about the Apostle Peter's admonition to members of God's church in 1 Peter chapter 2 verses 21 to 23. For even hereunto were you called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, who when he was reviled, reviled not again. When he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him that judges righteously. Paul the Apostle also admonished us in Romans 12, verse 19. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. It's not easy to continue taking wrong from someone or some people for years on end, especially with no end in sight. One certainly should do whatever possible to mitigate the circumstances for abuse and wrong. But I learned the value of Jesus' example when I realized that if one reviles or threatens someone for the wrong done, one invites retaliation, which could make the situation worse, even life threatening. Therefore, one should not take actions or say words that could make an enemy even a deadlier enemy, making the situation worse. That is the kind of issue I'm going to discuss in this video. Now, this is part 1 video. Now that God has drafted me to preach his message of warning to the world about soon coming global catastrophes, I have to discuss nations, leaders, or kings, or individuals who will certainly retaliate against me in every way they can when I expose their wicked deeds. God's commission to me in this end of the end times is stated in Revelation 10, verse 11. And he said to me, you must prophesy again about many peoples and nations and tongues, meaning in many languages, and kings or rulers of nations. In my weekly messages delivered every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. USA Eastern Standard Time, which I read in English from my computer but are then made available by God's angels to every human being on earth in his or her own language, I often issue warnings about nations such as Germany, China, India, Iran, and their leaders who are bent upon starting the Third World War. They have all put a bounty on my head, but that's nothing new. They've already been financially rewarding all those who have made attempts on my life for decades, encouraging others to continue doing so. Literally, people all around me pick up their guns to shoot me dead whenever I take a walk or go jogging. I identify German masqueraders who've committed murders in the USA in my YouTube and Facebook channels Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, but I generally avoid arousing the ire of the top leaders in America by calling them masqueraders directly in my criticism of their policies, who could then cause trouble for me. I follow the same policy with individuals with whom I am linked in some relationship in which they could make life very difficult for me. One such relationship is the landlord tenant relationship. That is what I'm going to discuss today. This message is extremely important for people who are likely to come in contact with German masqueraders, mainly in white countries, because it illustrates their unbounded wickedness, cruelty, treachery, and satanic cunning craftiness in victimizing people, while to the victims they will appear to be their very best friends. Germans have taught their wickedness to their allies, such as the Chinese, majority of Indians, Pashtuns living in Afghanistan and Pakistan, Palestinians, and others who also practice it quite expertly. Therefore, this message is important for everyone so that they can learn about the German methods and avoid becoming their victims and of their allies. This message is about my landlord for the past 14 years, Bob Ores, and his family. I must first explain why I decided to give this message. About 2 to 3 years ago, I came to learn that most people in God's church, particularly the top leaders and ministers, now part of different Church of God organizations after the split from our parent organization, Worldwide Church of God, which was founded by Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, which started the modern era of God's church. That the top leaders and ministers had participated in murder to make their commitment to the German and German Masquerader side. Thus, they had declared that they were in fact German masqueraders themselves or their allies. Of course, there is no list that I had access to learn who had made the commitment to the masquerader side. I had to go through the laborious process to learn from my sources one by one the names of those who had committed murder. That process took many months, and the list I have compiled and shared publicly on my YouTube and Facebook channels, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, is far from complete. I also inquired about the status of almost all people in my local church congregation in Tampa, Florida. I had to do it one by one over months. I was absolutely shocked to learn that recently deceased Jack Fike, father in law of my landlord Bob Ores, was a German masquerader and had committed murder decades ago and had been financially rewarded throughout his life. Jack Fike has two sons, Mike and Jonathan Fike, and two daughters, Sandy, married to Bob Ores, and Twyla, married to Dale Yates. I have already made public that Jack Fike and Mike Fike had committed murder long ago and had been financially rewarded for it. Now I can make public that Jonathan Fike, Bob Ores, and Dale Yates have also committed murder a long time ago and have been receiving financial rewards. I will add them to the list of murderers in God's church on my Facebook channel and also add those who have not committed murder. Now, I purposely avoided inquiring from my sources if Bob Ores had also committed murder because he's my landlord. I wanted to let sleeping dogs lie because he can do me harm as my landlord. Then, about 3 to 4 months ago, just to satisfy my curiosity, I decided to inquire if Bob Ores had also committed murder and was a German masquerader. But my intention was not to make it public to avoid his becoming a deadly enemy and making my extremely hard to bear troubles far worse and unbearable. As it is, I have enough trouble instigated by national German masquerader leadership who do everything they can to put an end to my life while making it as miserable as possible by heaping pain and suffering in the meantime. It was confirmed to me that Bob Ores is a murderer and began to sense that I was being asked to share that information with the world. But I avoided doing so for 3 to 4 months because that would make him my deadly enemy and retaliate against me by possibly finding ways to terminate my lease or in numerous other ways. However, over the past 3 4 months, my sources continue to signal to me to add Bob Ores to the list of murderers in God's church and expose him. After 3 to 4 such signals, I have finally decided to go public with the fact that Bob Ores is a murderer, whatever the consequences, and that he is receiving help with his real estate ownership and rental business. I believe he owns 10 to 12 different apartment complexes for rental purposes. I then confirmed a few details about the atrocities he has committed. The way such people receive help is to arrange the purchase of properties and help with all the approvals from the local authorities where German masqueraders are employed. Then masquerader national leadership steers tenants to their properties. I noticed that many in the apartment complex in which I am renting are immigrants from Africa. Many of them must have participated in murders in their own countries and were rewarded with getting legal immigration to the United States. They are obviously obligated to obey whatever the masqueraders order them. That's how occupancy rates are high and the rental business is highly profitable for Bob Orrs and other such murderers. Here are the reasons why I think our side has been so insistent that I expose Bob Orrs. First, I think he's a vicious, sadistic murderer who committed murder many years ago. I will provide evidence of his sadistic nature later. I believe this murder streak runs in the family. About 3 years ago, his brother, in his early 50s, was put to death for the murder he committed. The reason likely is that either his brother had recently committed the murder and was discovered, or he posed a continuing danger and would have committed more murders. That is why he had to be executed immediately. Bob Orrs has become rich because of the help he has received as a reward for the murder or murders committed by him. Generally, only vicious killers become very rich. Others who participated in murders by being part of a crowd of 30-40 people who murdered one person receive help to the tune of $12,000 to $50,000 annually in some ways to supplement their incomes. Heavily discounted or free vacations and meals at restaurants and free furniture and other perks. German masqueraders in the USA have invented numerous ways to murder innocent people. I have given thought to whom I would consider to be the biggest, the vilest, and lowest scumbag German masquerader or their ally who has committed murder. A person who has kidnapped, tortured, and mutilated people before murdering them would be such a scumbag. Another kind would be one who has used threats to force a family to divorce and then isolate the wife and children by forcing her or the former husband to move away. Another variation could be a masquerader marrying a non masquerader woman and divorcing her after a child or children are born, or getting her pregnant so that she becomes a single mom. Then the masquerader befriends this single mom with small help, financial help, or other kind of help occasionally. After she begins trusting him, then he lures her into a funeral home with an electric crematorium attached, ostensibly to attend a funeral, and asks him to bring her family along. Then he overpowers her and cremates her and her child or children alive. Such a murderer would be considered lowest of the low in my opinion. Bob Orrs is such lowest of the low, a vile scumbag because he has cremated an adult and his or her child or children alive in an electric crematorium. I will discuss later what he deserves as punishment. Orrs escaped punishment because when murderers were ordered by the masqueraders from instructions received from Satan about 2 decades ago to discuss their murder with families and children, Bob Orrs did not obey. That's why his wickedness remained hidden. On receiving new orders, a couple of years ago, he was forced to comply and discuss his wicked deed with his children, put it on a video, and then send it in to the German masqueraders. That's how his wickedness became known. Therefore, he needs to be exposed so that the benefits he receives can be somewhat curbed. Second reason for our side asking me to expose him is that he definitely poses a danger to the unwary whites of non-German ancestry and their allies, and will most likely murder someone again if he is ordered to do so. Some of them who might become his tenants. In fact, he probably won't pass up an easy opportunity to murder anyone. The third reason is that he needs to know that I am now aware that he has made many attempts on my life as well, for which crime he will be required to pay someday. Now, besides all the Fike men and in laws being murderers, except for Jonathan Fike, all the others have made multiple attempts on my life. Therefore, the important question for me to answer is, why was I deceived about them for so long? I moved from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to Florida on December 2nd, 2002. Therefore, I have known Bob Orse and the Fike family for nearly 21 years because we were members of the same church and attended weekly church services together. I considered all of them to be of Israelite descent and not German masqueraders. I came to learn only about a year ago that the Fike family were murderers and that Bob Orse was a murderer only 3 to 4 months ago. But how was I deceived for 20 long years? Our church members are very serious about our religion and would be considered devout Christians who practice our religion very diligently. We consider ourselves to be brothers in Jesus Christ and heirs together of the kingdom of God. One completely trusts one's brothers in the faith, showing genuine Christian love for one another in words and deeds. The Fikes were all financially successful. Financial support of such members in the form of tithes and offerings kept the church in a financially healthy condition and able to fulfill its commission given in Matthew 24, verse 14, which states, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." They were all very knowledgeable in the scriptures, and all the men except Jonathan Fike gave sermons at church. They and their two daughters had also attended the church's college, Ambassador College, for 4 full years. They were local church elders or deacons. Therefore, the family were considered pillars in the church. One naturally trusts such people and does not suspect they could do wrong to a brother in Jesus Christ. In church, I consider the Fikes to be my very best friends. Bob Orse has been my landlord for 14 years. Every year, our church celebrates the Passover, which is followed by a special dinner which we call the night to be much observed. Usually, we have that dinner with family and friends in God's church. Since I am single, I am invited by a church family for that dinner every year, unless about 30 to 40 of us are gathered together for a catered meal. Jack Fike and his wife Kathy invited me for that dinner for about 10 to 12 years. The dinner was always a special treat, and I came home happy and content. I thought the Fikes were looking out for me in the church and were practicing true Christianity. I did not fall sick or die after having dinner with them. There was no way for me to suspect that I was being served poisoned food, though I was probably for 7 to 8 of those 10 to 12 years. God protected me. Some years I would see strange people at the dinner who were not members. They most probably brought the poisoned food in those years because the Masquerader national leadership wanted to make sure that Jack and Kathy Fike and others were not lying that they were serving me poisoned food because I had not died. Then, to get credit for making attempts on my life, some years Mike Fike and family, some years Bob Orse and family, and some years Dale Yates would come to dinner. That way, Bob Orse's son Stephen and son in law and wife Sandy have claimed credit. Mike Fike, wife Nancy, and his son David Fike have also claimed credit. Dale Yates, his sister Brenda, her husband Robert Camacho, and Dale's son in law have claimed credit by one year the Camachos inviting me to dinner at their home. Every week we met for church services and enjoyed pleasant, friendly conversation with each other. Usually once a month we enjoyed church potlucks together. Because of these reasons, I considered the Fikes to be some of my very best friends in or out of the church. If I needed some advice, I could consult them. I envisioned that if I was ever in the market to buy a house, I would pay them to inspect the house before buying and also rely on them for maintenance because they are in the construction or apartment rental business. I thought that if I ever got married, I would definitely invite them to the wedding. That's how close I considered them to be to me. None of them had German names, therefore, I never suspected them of being German masqueraders. I have now lived 42 years in the United States. For more than 40 of those years, I have been troubled by German masqueraders. They've especially troubled me in the apartments or houses I've rented. Therefore, I considered that renting an apartment from Bob Orrs would provide me relief from that kind of trouble. However, it did not turn out that way. But I did not fault Bob Orrs for all that I suffered. I firmly believed that German masqueraders were using threats to force my apartment neighbors to trouble me. Considering Orrs to be a devout Christian, I simply could not suspect that he could ever have a hand in troubling me himself. I thought masqueraders would also be threatening him to force him to allow all the torture, pain, and suffering that was being inflicted on me. But sometimes I felt that he was not showing much backbone by allowing neighbors to inflict so much suffering on me. However, now that I know he's a German masquerader and a particularly sadist and vicious one, I realize that he was fully involved and responsible for physically troubling and mentally torturing me for the entire 14 years that I have been his tenant. He is not a member of God's church, but he is a member of the synagogue of Satan, which God had prophesied would infiltrate the Philadelphian era of his church, as stated in Revelation 3, verse 1. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before your feet, and to know that I have loved you. For all these reasons, I was deceived about Bob Orris's true nature. Only when I learned about a year ago that the Fikes were German masqueraders and murderers, and about 3 to 4 months ago that Bob Orrs was also a German masquerader and a murderer, that I had an explanation for all the terrible experiences I had with them. In part 2 video in this series, I will describe what all I suffered as Bob Orrs' tenant. I will demonstrate what a sadist he is and also show some of the crafty methods German masqueraders use to torture and trouble people while making them believe they are their very best friends. It will be very valuable information to keep in mind if a person feels someone is trying to make him or her a victim. It may save your life. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, how Bible prophecy is playing an important role in world affairs, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook channels Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini to view and get information on the latest videos.